Sony's 24.2 megapixel a7 III is the most eagerly anticipated mirrorless camera of the year. Sony calls it the basic model in its a7 full-frame lineup because it sits below the high-resolution a7R III and the video-centric a7S II. But this camera is far from basic. On paper, it's good at everything from 4K video, autofocus, high-speed shooting, and of course the most important thing, image quality. I've had the camera for a few days now, so how does the real-world performance measure up to the specs? Ridiculously well. From the first moment I grabbed it, I found that I could use it instinctively and take really great images with it. The a7 III has gained a bit of weight over its predecessor, but for a full-frame camera it's still pretty light at 650 grams. In comparison, the similarly priced Nikon D750 weighs more at 750 grams. Those extra grams have been put to good use. The a7 III has a bigger, more comfortable grip for one thing. It's also got a much bigger battery like the one on Sony's flagship A9. That lets you shoot 700 shots on a charge, the most for any mirrorless camera. Unfortunately, Sony borrowed the electronic viewfinder from the last model, just increasing the magnification slightly. It's not as sharp as the one on Panasonic's GH5S or the Fujifilm X-H1. It now has a touchscreen, which is nice, except that it can only be used to select focus and not do menu operations. It's also not as bright or sharp as the one on the a7R III or even on its predecessor, the a7 II. The a7 III has a great complement of ports with USB Type-C, HDMI, and thankfully, both headphone and microphone ports. It comes with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC, but the required smartphone app, Play Memories, occasionally fails to connect and is a bit laggy. One thing you won't get by reading the specs is how Sony has improved handling and ergonomics on the a7 III. For instance, it's moved the record button next to the viewfinder in a much more easy to access spot. And just the way that everything feels at hand, it's easy to access the controls for exposure compensation, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, so that you can think about photography and not where to find the controls. And Sony has also greatly improved the battery life by putting the battery from the A9 in the a7 III. It's much bigger. I was finding I could go out and shoot for several hours. I still had 60 to 70% of the battery left. So that's another big improvement over the last model, the a7 II. Sony's a7 III may be a dream on paper, but the proof is in the shooting. Burst speeds are top-notch for a so-called basic camera, letting you fire 10 frames per second for up to 9 seconds. Fast shooting is useless if the autofocus isn't equally fast and accurate, however. Luckily, the a7 III has an AF system that's up to the task, and the many modes make it possible to get sharp shots in just about any scenario. Sony's algorithm-powered eye detection is particularly good, ensuring that your subject's faces are always in focus. When it comes to video, the a7 III might be Sony's best full-frame camera to date. For 20 frames per second shooting, it uses the entire 6K sensor and super samples down to 4K. Video autofocus is good, but not great. The center lock on AF lets you isolate a specific subject, but it doesn't work as well as the tap-to-track dual-pixel AF system found on Canon models like the 5D Mark IV. The a7 III delivers on image and video quality. It has Sony's new 24.2 megapixel backside illuminated sensor with dual gain architecture. That yields spectacular low-light performance with usable images and video up to ISO 25600 and even beyond. It's particularly good at preserving detail in shadow areas. On top of that, Sony claims 15 stops of dynamic range for the a7 III, near the top of its class. Images are sharp and colors accurate, especially skin tones that have been a problem for Sony in the past. For JPEG images, the a7 III yields more natural skin tones and colors than the last model. Sharpening and noise reduction are handled better than on any other camera. Video is pin sharp with accurate colors and shallow depth of field that's ideal for creating a cinematic look. You can also shoot 1080p at up to 120 frames per second using the full sensor and slow it down in camera to 30p or 24p. The a7 has several log profiles to maximize dynamic range. However, it doesn't output 10-bit video like Panasonic's GH5, so you have fewer options in post-production. Sony's a7 III isn't perfect, as the EVF and rear display fall short of rivals. Video quality is limited compared to the GH5S, it's not as rugged as the a7R II or A9, and as with all A-series mirrorless cameras, the lenses are expensive. For $2,000 though, it is nearly peerless. Nikon's 3-year-old $1,800 D750 has a full-frame sensor, but it can only shoot at 6.5 frames per second and lacks 4K video. Canon's EOS 60 Mark II is newer, but also slower and limited to 1080p video. If you want 4K, Panasonic's $2,000 GH5 has excellent 10-bit video and higher DCI 4K resolution, but you'll have to settle for a much smaller Micro Four Thirds sensor. Fujifilm's $1,900 XH1 has much improved video, but again, a smaller sensor. Sony's main competition might be itself. The last-gen A7R II sells for the same price as the A7 III and also offers 4K video, image stabilization, and more. If you want better full-frame 4K video quality, the A7S II is also a good choice. But frankly, the A7 III now offers the best rounded feature set you can get at that price. Sony might call it the basic model of the A7 lineup, but it's possibly the best camera on the market, period, at any price.